Be part of this Discover the Word Bible study as Mark DeHaan, Elisa Morgan, and Bill Crowder continue to explore the miraculous life of the Old Testament prophet Elisha. It's an amazing story, full of twists and turns and a lot of seemingly upside-down ways that God made himself known through the miraculous life of Elisha. Part 6 of this 7-episode study is next on the Discover the Word podcast. And I think it's safe to say that nobody gets along with everybody. We've all got stories of classmates, coworkers, bosses, family members, neighbors who've stabbed us in the back, undermined us at just about every turn, and generally made our lives miserable for a time. We all have what we would think of as enemies. And since we all have that in common, we all have a vested interest in another event in our series about the miraculous life of Elisha, because it brings up the question, how should I treat my enemies? Yeah, it's something the Bible actually does have quite a bit to say about. And so pull your chair in close and be part of the group as we get another episode of the Discover the Word podcast underway. And welcome to Discover the Word Bible Engagement for Life from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And this is the 6th installment, the 6th episode of a series about the miraculous life of Elisha. This series has taken us into the account of the Old Testament books of 1st and 2nd Kings, where there's an extended section about the miraculous things that God did in and through the prophet Elisha's life. And it's been fascinating to see what all this says about God and what it says about us and how this amazingly fits into the bigger story that the Bible is telling. Reading backward and reading forward is the term that we've become familiar with throughout the course of this study. And so last time we ended part 5 with the miraculous way that Elisha knew the battle plans of Aram, or Syria, a nation that was at war with Israel. We're pretty frustrated that these secret things weren't secret, and Elisha was the problem. Aram, or Syria, obviously wants to do away with the problem that Elisha poses. And so when they come looking to assassinate Elisha, we run into another miraculous event in the miraculous life of Elisha. And interestingly, it in some ways helps us with what can be a fairly complex question as Christians, and that is, how do we treat our enemies?
How does a wise person treat his enemy?
Depends on what kind of enemy it is, doesn't it?
Yeah, what do you mean?
Well, there's enemies against our faith, there's enemies against our country.
Yeah, there's enemies that we face, maybe someone might say in the workplace, or someone who's a bully at school who takes advantage of another child. There are different kinds of enemies.
Yeah. And sometimes we just say, well, you treat your enemy with love. Jesus taught us to do
Love
that, right?
your enemies, exactly.
Yeah, but when it gets to times of war, it takes on a whole different look, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you treat the enemy soldier that you capture?
Okay. So we're talking now very specifically about a prisoner of war.
A prisoner of war.
Yeah. My father-in-law was a prisoner of war during World War
Really?
II. He was a waist gunner on a bomber in the European theater, shot down, spent a number of months in a German prisoner of war camp before they were liberated in May of 1945. They were not treated kindly. They weren't brutalized necessarily, but it was nevertheless a horrific time for him.
Yeah.
It was a time from which he emotionally never really recovered.
I bet.
Right. And today, in a day of what we would call terrorism, when our leaders are desperate to try to find out how do we avoid the next terror attack, and what kind of information can we get from our prisoners of war to help us stay a step ahead, these become huge issues. And in our day, I think, compared to ancient times, there are so many different issues. We've got the Geneva Convention, we've got the Hague Convention, where nations tried to come up with some kinds of rules of warfare. Well, how can you do that when everything is supposed to be fair in war, right? And the reason I wanted to talk about it today is because we've been talking about the life of Elisha, the miraculous episodes of his life. And last time we started a story where Elisha had been given the discernment of God to anticipate where the army of Aram, where they were going to try to attack and ambush.
And you told us that Aram is Syria.
Syria, present day, that's a region of present day Syria. And
Elisha would go and report this information that he was receiving from God through discernment to the king of Israel.
to the king of Israel. So they were frustrating the king of Aram or of Syria. The king of Syria finds out what's happening, and he says, we got to get that prophet. And so first of all, he asked the question, where is he? And then when they found out where he was, he sent his army to get him. Let's pick it up as the soldiers of Aram, of Syria, are moving in. We're in 2 Kings chapter 6, okay? And let's pick it up with verse 18. So, Elisa, will you start, and then Bill pick it up? And let's just read 18 through 23.
As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike these people with blindness. And so he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, this is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man that you're looking for. And he led them to Samaria.
Okay, now I forgot to say there are going to be some comedic elements in this story. You know, Elisha, he has access to some options that the Arameans don't have option to, like, Lord, blind them.
Because that happens all the time, right?
Right,
Sure.
all the time. The question is, when he says, Lord, blind them, and it says the Lord blinded them, the question is, I wonder if he blinded them physically. Did he take away their sight so they couldn't see anything at all? Or they weren't able to discern what was happening. You know, they got confused.
Muddled.
They got muddled. Follow me and I'll take you to the man you're looking for.
Which was him.
Which was him.
Right. So they don't even recognize him. And they have to be led. That's what the words say here. He had to lead them.
Yeah, he led them. So they were either confused or they were just outright blind.
Okay.
But anyway, he takes them right into the stronghold of the nation of Israel, into Samaria. And let's pick it up at that point. Bill?
Okay, verse 20. As soon as they had entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they discovered that they were in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elisha, My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them?
Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill men that you've captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. And so he prepared a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory.
Okay, how do you treat your enemy?
Looks like you make a feast.
And again, in ancient times, this was not necessarily protocol for handling prisoners of war.
No, because you do not want them to live to fight another day. You don't want to have to face the same guy in battle again. So you capture prisoners. There's a summary execution so that you now don't have to deal with those people again.
Right. And in fact, we're going to see in our next conversation, these men did live to fight another day. That's another story, okay? Let's just look at this amazing supernatural event where God gave into Elisha's hands these enemy soldiers, the army of the king of Syria. Elisha treats them with consideration.
After he blinds them and gives them their sight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a way in which they've already flexed God's muscles very strongly. And if I had been blinded, whether it was physical or in my mental capacities, and then restored and given a feast, that's a pretty decent strategy to make a friend out of an enemy.
Right.
By being powerful and revealing the source of true power.
It's not routine. That's not what normally happens.
But it could be effective.
Right. Again, what is the background? What's the context for all of these miracles of Elisha? What's happening in the big picture?
Well, in the big picture, the northern kingdom of Israel has really lost its way spiritually. They have drifted into the worship of the Baals, the gods of the area, the gods of the Gentile nations that surrounded them. And they have lost contact with their true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Elijah came on the scene first. Drought followed, famine followed, fire falls from heaven. Now Elisha has stepped in to remind them that there's a God in the heaven.
Yeah.
And he's the one that you're supposed to have your allegiance to, not the gods of the region.
Right. Just for their sake, the people of Israel, that they were to figure this out or to know this, who the one true God was.
Well, it's also for God's sake and for all the surrounding communities,
Yes, for
the
For
neighbors.
the communities, right.
Yeah, they were supposed to be a light to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And in a sense, this is a much bigger scale echo of what happened earlier when Elisha healed Naaman, the Syrian, because here Jesus would reflect on that later and say, weren't there other lepers in Israel? And they didn't get healed, but this Gentile did.
Right.
So we're seeing God really doing things in Israel to reach to the people beyond.
Right. These unconventional ways of treating people, even prisoners of war,
Yeah.
Even enemies.
even enemies. And it didn't just say he gave them water and bread. He made a feast for them.
But that wasn't the king's first instinct, was it? The king's first instinct
Of
was,
Israel.
should I kill him? Should I kill him? I mean,
Yeah. New Living Translation says, Elisha replies, of course not. Do we kill prisoners of war? Give them food and drink and send them back to their master. You know, it raises a lot of questions, but the point was they treated these prisoners of war with kindness. Now, we've looked at the big picture of the time. In the days of Elisha, Elijah and Elisha were calling the nation back to the one true God for the sake of the neighbors, as well as for the sake of the people of Israel. Now, if we think of the bigger story still moving forward, do you hear anything here that resonates with what happens eventually and ultimately?
I hear prisoners being freed. I hear loving our enemies. I hear that Peter and Paul would be challenged to make room for Gentiles. I mean, I hear an ongoing, wide-armed embrace of people to the message of hope
Right.
in Christ.
Right.
there really is here a hint, an anticipation of the things that Jesus would say and do and open the doors for in dealing with people who we see as our
Yeah,
enemies.
and what's so interesting is it hasn't always been this way with the nation of Israel. When you think of the conquest, you know, they took their promised land. God told them to kill everybody. Even more recently, when Elisha's predecessor and mentor, he didn't act that way with his enemies, did he? We killed 400 prophets of Baal.
Yeah.
Wiped them out.
Yeah. So you're right, Bill. You're getting a hint here of something that is still going to be unveiled in the future. But it's the same God. When you get there, when you get to Jesus releasing, as you indicated, at least the prisoners, teaching his disciples to love their enemies, you have the same God now in flesh, God with us, so we can see how we're getting there. But for now, maybe we say in our lives, this is difficult to do. How do we treat our enemies? We can't figure that all out, but it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about a God who loves us, and not just us, but also our neighbors. And it's worth asking God, how, Lord, do you want me to treat my enemies?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning of the episode, we all do have those people in our lives. No one gets along with everyone. We have enemies. And so that was a helpful conversation to lead off part 6 of our 7-part study of 1st and 2nd Kings, looking at the miraculous life of Elisha. By the power of God, the prophet Elisha does a lot of truly miraculous things and mysteriously knows a lot of things that he could only know because God was miraculously revealing the information to him. And so let's listen now as Martin, Elisa, and Bill focus on the next event recorded in 2 Kings. What we're calling the Don't Kill the Messenger chapter in the miraculous life of Elisha.
Sometimes we talk about killing the messenger. What do we mean by that? When do we use that phrase?
I think we use it when someone is delivering horrible news,
Yeah.
but they're not responsible for it. And so it's like, don't kill the messenger.
You know, what kind of horrible news?
Well, I mean, you know, you have a health situation and the doctor comes in and he says, listen, I've got bad news, but don't kill the messenger. You know, I mean, there's kind of this sense of don't blame me for something I don't have any control over. I'm just telling you what's happening.
Is that an idea that shows up in the Bible?
Well, we see it with the prophets in the Old Testament. I mean, most of the prophets did not live terribly long lives because once they came in with a message that was not liked,
Why wasn't it liked?
well, because it wasn't what the people wanted to hear. So when a prophet comes in and says, because of where you are, this is going to happen, we don't want that.
Okay, in our last conversation, we had this amazing situation where God delivered the army of Syria, old Aram, into Elisha's hands. Okay, remember that?
Right.
And actually, then Elisha led those captives right into the capital of Israel, Samaria.
Yeah.
And remember what the king said when he saw
He
him?
was like, do you want me to kill him now?
Yeah, shall we kill him? We got him, all right?
All right.
And Elisha said what?
No, of course not.
Why not?
We don't treat prisoners of war that way.
So what happened?
So he makes a feast for them. And
Who did?
Elisha does, and the king does.
Yeah, the king does. Big
And then
feast.
they send them back home.
Okay. And the text ends, we're in chapter 6 of 2 Kings.
Uh-huh.
In verse 23, what does it say?
So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory.
Okay, so it stopped. So it sounds like, what did we do? We just made our enemies into friends, right?
And it worked.
And it worked.
Yeah. For a while.
Right. Because what does the next verse say?
Verse 24, sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria.
Which would have been the capital of
Same
Israel.
city.
Where
Okay,
they
let's
just had
stop
a
right
feast.
there for a
Yeah.
minute, okay? All right. Elisha could have helped the king of Israel make sure that the army of Syria would not have lived to fight another day.
Yeah.
But instead, he says, show them consideration. We're not going to kill them, send them back home. But first, feed them.
Yeah. You know, this is an attempt to show goodwill that you hope on a human level
Right.
will be reciprocated by goodwill. You know, if we take a step, maybe they'll take a step. And if we take another step, then maybe they'll
Right.
take another step. And
Right. And isn't this one reason that people who are not people of faith, at least not in the sense of the Bible or of Christ, they laugh at us and they say, you know, your teacher taught us to love our enemies.
Yeah.
And this is a great example. It's not practical. It's foolish.
Yeah. Because there's a sense in which our natural inclination is to strike back.
Right.
Our natural inclination is to make others hurt like they have hurt
Like
us.
Peter in the
Right.
garden to
Yeah.
lop off Malchus's ear.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the whole point is it was the prophet who urged the king of Israel to treat them well. And this king now is ready to shoot the messenger, to kill the messenger,
Yeah.
because the peace only lasted for a while. Let's pick up the story at this point, because we're about to move from what I think is one of the high points of the Old Testament,
Okay.
treating prisoners of war with kindness, because it sounds a whole lot like what Jesus taught his disciples to do, taught us to do. But we're going to go from that high ground into what I think is a text that the story is so low that it's almost difficult to read. But I want us to read it because it's part of the text, and there's got to be a reason that this is a part of our Bible, okay? We're in chapter 6 of 2 Kings.
Uh-huh.
So at least we start with verse 24 again, and let's start to move through this, and Bill, you pick up and help as we go.
Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels.
Okay, let's just stop there for a minute. What's the picture?
Everybody's starving, and crazy things have been inflated to
And
astronomical
why
prices.
does a siege result in...
Because it cuts off your resources. You no longer have the lines
The
for
trade.
shipping and trade and so
Okay.
forth to bring food into the city.
Okay, and so even a donkey's head, which from an Old Testament point of view, that was unclean food.
Yeah.
We're not to eat a donkey.
Yeah.
And some of the translations talk about this as actually being a cup of dove's dung. We know that, again, that's an unclean food, but it's high prices
Yeah.
for these incredibly despicable forms
Kinds
of
of food.
And
Okay.
the contrast from
The
the king
feast.
throwing the feast
That's good.
now to the people suffering a famine.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
let's pick it up, Bill, would you? 26.
One day, as the king of Israel was walking along the wall of the city, a woman called to him, "Please help me, my lord the king."
Now, let's remember, this is within the siege, okay? This is in the city that is being besieged.
And he answered, "If the Lord doesn't help you, what can I do? I have neither food from the threshing floor nor wine from the press to give you." But then the king asked, "What's the matter?" And she replied, "This woman said to me, 'Come on, let's eat your son today, then we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we cooked my son and ate him. Then the next day I said to her, 'Kill your son so we can eat him.' But she has hidden her son."
Okay, let's just stop there for a minute. How does that make you feel,
Oh, it's
Elisa?
just horrific. I mean, really, it's nauseous.
It's nauseous. It's almost like, can't you imagine people saying, you know, I don't know what this Bible of yours is, but
How did this story get in
how
here?
does this story get in the Bible of two mothers agreeing to kill their children or to eat their children to survive themselves?
And I think sometimes the Bible has stories like this in it to show us just how dark our hearts can come if we're pushed to the very depths of our worst inclinations. This is where we end up,
Yeah.
left to
In
ourselves.
fact, you know, I had a friend just recently who told me about being in a Bible reading group where they were actually reading this text. And he said one of the women, after reading this and talking about it, went home and ended up coming back and saying, I've received Christ.
Oh, you're kidding.
What she said was, I was reading that and I thought, oh, good night. You mean this is the kind of thing that happens to humanity when we turn our back on our God? I mean, she got it.
I think about in the days of Noah, how all the inclinations of the heart were always inclined toward evil. This is the extreme.
Let's pick it up. Elise, would you pick it up at that point at
I
verse
want to read
30?
this part. Okay. When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and there, underneath, he had sackcloth on his body. He said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today."
Okay, here's the kill the messenger.
Kill the messenger.
Okay,
Yeah,
and again,
yeah.
why was he so angry at Elisha?
Because Elisha told him to let these guys go, and now they're back.
They're back. Okay, good. All right.
And this is how far things are going.
Right, pick it up again, Elise.
Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him?" While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him, and the king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?"
Okay, let's just stop there. Why should I wait for the Lord? What does that imply?
It implies that he has been waiting for the Lord.
Right, or at least that Elisha has been urging him to turn to the Lord and wait on him, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that what we know from history is that the northern kingdom of Israel never had a king who had a faith relationship with the God of Israel. The southern kingdom had a few. The northern kingdom had none. And so here we have a guy who's talking about waiting on God, but he has no relationship with God. And so, like his nation, he is far from this God that he's crying out against.
Right.
But he has a relationship with a messenger from the Lord, which we see all in the New Testament too, on and on.
How do we see this incredibly dark moment moving into the New Testament to find itself echoed again in another terribly dark moment?
We see the Heavenly Father giving up his Son for our rescue.
And the language that Jesus himself uses in anticipating that rescue is that he says, "I'm the bread of life." But then he indicates to his disciples that unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you'll have no part with me. And we're told that at that point, many left him.
Wow.
What Jesus was actually doing is looking forward to a day when he himself would groan, would suffer, would die, in a sense of giving himself a sacrifice so that the children of the mothers of Israel could have hope. When they, in a sense, spiritual sense, received Jesus, his flesh, his blood, in a spiritual sense, could find life in a God who allowed this terrible thing to happen to show what happens when we turn our back on God. And then who steps in at a certain point in the future and says, "I'm going to bear it all in my own body to suffer and groan with you to provide you life."
Yeah, fascinating again to see how the miraculous life of Elisha fits in the even bigger story that the Bible is telling. And the essence of the gospel is so liberating, isn't it? Even in our darkest desperation, God stepped into human form and rescued us. That's the central truth of the Christian faith, and it's something that we can celebrate every day. Well, have you ever felt trapped? Whether it was trapped by financial struggles or illness or personal conflict or just bad choices that you made? Yeah, we've all had times when things seemed, hopeless. But as the miraculous life of Elisha helps us discover, with God, nothing is impossible. There is always hope. An event in Elisha's life that demonstrates that is up next, after we take a quick time out for a word from Our Daily Bread Ministry. Now, Discover the Word is part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, and our stated mission as a ministry is to make that story and that wisdom and that message of the Bible understandable and accessible to people all around the world. And one of the other effective ways that we've been able to do that is through the Our Daily Bread Daily Devotional. which suggests a scripture passage for you to read each day, and then gives you an encouraging reflection to help you connect with God and His Word. And that daily piece of it, that is so important. Our research has indicated that 4 or more days each week is kind of the threshold for being able to see significant spiritual growth and transformation. And so having this daily devotional tool, as we see it, is crucial. And another thing we found is that a lot of people who use the Our Daily Bread devotional have an interest in other people having a time of engagement with God and Scripture each day. And so a lot of people, our latest count is more than 135,000, have signed up to be what we call Our Daily Bread ambassadors. And they get at least 5 copies, and many of them more, of the devotional to pass on to others. Here's what one person shared with us. She wrote, "I use the Our Daily Bread in a small way as my own ministry. I share these publications with other residents of the care facility that I live in so that they may reach out to me or others if they're unsaved or if they're in need of comfort." Isn't that great? Well, you can sign up to be an Our Daily Bread ambassador and discover how God might lead you to share the Our Daily Bread with others. We'll have a link in our show notes, or you can go to odbm.org. That's ODBM for Our Daily Bread Ministries, odbm.org. And here's what you do then. Click Print under the daily subscription options that you'll see up in the top right corner of the page. And then click Order Multiple when you see the quarterly option to become an Our Daily Bread ambassador. And so do you ever wonder if it really does any good to have faith in God? Does it make sense to pray to God about situations that seem beyond change? Well, this next event in the miraculous life of Elisha shows us that, yes, faith in God is the best path to take through life. And yes, praying about situations that seem hopeless and beyond change does make sense. And so let's listen now to an important perspective-shaping part of this discussion about Elisha and the God that he and we have faith in. Mart?
I think we've all lived long enough to see a nation, to see our own culture and society facing problems that seem to have no solution, desperate times. And after a while, you can see that it begins to wear on people. Mm-hmm. It wears on them economically, socially, spiritually.
And I think as we age, we maybe see that more. There is an optimism of youth that I see reinvented in every generation. Mm-hmm. And as we age, I see it wearing off more quickly. Mm-hmm. I know what you're talking about.
And I think back even to when we hadn't lived as long as we now have. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at a very unpopular war in Vietnam, followed by the situation with Watergate, followed by the situation with the hostages in Iran and so forth. And I mean, you had this whole wave of things. It was easy to become very cynical very quickly.
Right. And when a nation's sense of security begins to falter, crumble, and people just feel like they're under threat, we begin to lose our sons and our daughters to many different things, whether it's be in the military or just simply to the culture. There's just this sense of we're losing control and our prayers are not being answered. What is the challenge, do you think, to a nation, to a people, and to their spirituality when they feel like they're getting no answers?
Boy, it's so hard because I think all of us love our country. We want the best for our country. We pray certain things for God to bring Himself more to bear in the hearts and minds of the people of our country. And a whole lot of times it seems like there's nothing happening. And when people say, why not? I don't have a really good answer.
Do you think under these circumstances, there's ever a tendency to start taking things into your own hands?
Sure.
And to start responding to the enemy and responding. It's almost like assuming, well, God's not fixing this. I guess we're going to have to.
Well, I think that's always the way. I mean, Elisa, you've talked with us before about how so many of the things we wrestle with in life is because of control issues.
Yeah.
But I think we also have our priorities kind of mixed up. Sometimes we start slipping into, well, we think we understand what God wants to do with our country, and so demise issues can't possibly be within His power. And the reality is we don't have His mind, His entire divine and sovereign desires extend beyond what we understand.
Right. We've been studying the life of Elisha. and together with Elijah, his mentor and predecessor, both were called by God to call a nation and the nations of the region back to the one true God, the God of creation. And in our last couple of conversations, we've been looking at it's really a tragic series of events that have spun out of control. The one we're looking at today is in 2 Kings chapter 6, and it's a situation in which the king of Israel finds himself furious with the prophet Elisha. Do you remember why he's so furious with him?
Well, Elisha didn't kill the enemies that he brought
When they had a
into
chance to.
Samaria. Right. They had an opportunity to.
And what happened as a
Instead,
result of that?
he threw a party and was gracious to them. As a result, they came back.
And now they're under siege.
Who's under siege now?
Samaria, which is the capital city of Israel,
The north.
is
yes.
now under siege.
So the people are starving and there's no
How bad
food.
is it?
So bad that 2 women actually discussed eating their own children.
Yeah, and who heard them talk about this?
The king,
The king of who?
Israel.
Israel.
He believes Elisha could have prevented this.
He believes Elisha could have prevented it. So it's like he's furious with Elisha. And let's pick up after he hears this woman tell him how bad it's gotten, that she and her friend have actually eaten their own children. Pick it up, Elisa, will you, at verse 30 of 2 Kings chapter 6. We're going to read 3 verses here.
When the king heard the women's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and there underneath, he had sackcloth on his body, burlap, as some translations say. He said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today."
Verse 32, Elisha was sitting in his house with the elders of Israel when the king sent a messenger to summon him. But before the messenger arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "A murderer has sent a man to cut off my head. When he arrives, shut the door and keep him out. We will soon hear his master's steps following him." While Elisha was still saying this, the messenger arrived, and the king said, "All this misery is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?"
Okay. Say that in your own words. What has just happened?
What good does it do to have faith?
Yeah.
Really?
Let's pick it up and read now one more verse here.
Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the men of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heavens, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it."
Okay. Why was the assistant, the messenger of the king, so unable to believe this?
Well, because the situation was impossible. I mean, again, they're undergoing famine of such extreme proportions. But all that's against the background of the fact that he's been a part of a culture that for years has walked away from their faith relationship with God, a people who were supposed to be a people of God, who are supposed to be representing God in the culture. This guy's part of that, and yet they've abandoned God. They've gone after Baal and all those other gods. And so he really does not have a faith context in which to view this problem.
To understand God's power.
Right.
And at the same time, he's in a context where any kind of food, especially even despicable food like a donkey's head or some dove dung,
Which they were buying at great expense.
were selling for astronomically
Right.
inflated prices. And good food now is going to be down to a shekel.
Right.
And also the immediacy of it. He says, by this time tomorrow. I mean, that's very specific. He's not saying, sometime in the near future. He's saying, by this time tomorrow.
How do you do that?
Yeah, how does this turn that quickly?
Yeah. The messenger had said what? It couldn't happen even if what?
God opened the windows of heaven.
Yeah, the
What does that
floodgates.
imply? What would it mean for God
Like
to
if he
open?
rained down,
Rained down,
barley fell like
right.
rain.
Which in their history, they should have known God was capable of doing.
Yeah.
But as Bill said, these weren't a people who followed God,
No, they weren't. They're
even though they were God's people.
That's right. But Elisha replies, "You will see it happen with your own eyes, but you won't be able to eat any of it." There's more to the story. We'll take one more conversation and talk about it next time. Reading this section of Scripture, this little window into this desperate condition of these people, what do we now know as far as what God can do with a moment?
God
Well,
can provide a way out of anything.
Yeah, I
And he
mean, you
does.
look into the New Testament, specifically in the context of hungry people and food, and we saw Jesus in a moment take a kid's sack lunch and feed thousands of people out of it. The windows of heaven were opening and the provision was being made. It was a reminder that God has enough, even when our situation seems overwhelming.
And if you take Jesus a little further, what else could happen in a moment?
I guess I'm thinking about the resurrection in a twinkling of an eye, so to speak. I mean, Lazarus was dead and then he was alive.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus himself was in the tomb and then he was raised from the dead. I mean, the deliverance of God happened in a moment.
Right. And in the case of Jesus' resurrection, that happened on that Passover weekend. And we know that if you look at the Passover event itself, the sacrifice of Christ, his death, his suffering, his resurrection, the war of wars, in effect, was settled in that moment, right? From that point forward, everything could look different. From that point forward, everyone who believed in the Jesus, who called out for rescue, the God whose Son died in our behalf, had hope, had an ability to see that things are not simply unraveling to a point of ultimate despair. The God of gods has stepped in and answered our plight. Well, in this situation in the Old Testament, we're going to see in the rest of the story how something happens not quite as dramatically as the death of Christ and his resurrection, but something that nevertheless, within like 24 hours, completely changed the situation, the well-being of the people of God in Israel. But for now, I think it's just important for us to realize that as we read the scriptures and as we follow events and see not only what was happening in the darkest possible sense and how quickly it could turn around, we need to be a people who realize that there's always hope when our confidence is in the God of gods. There's always other possibilities that we can't imagine when we're putting our faith and our trust in the God who ultimately revealed himself not only to the people of Israel in desperate times, but to the world in the person of Jesus of Nazareth.
You're at the table with Marty Hahn, Lisa Morgan, and Bill Crowder, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of this event in the miraculous life of Elisha. How does God fulfill this word that Elisha spoke? Well, let's continue this conversation about how with God there is always hope. As dark as a situation may be, God is a God of mercy. And as Elisha told the king, don't give up hope. As bad as it looks today, tomorrow will be better. And so, was he right? And if so, how in the world did God turn a hopeless situation like this into a rescue? Well, it's another chapter in the miraculous life of Elisha that reveals the often upside-down message of the Bible.
If you hear someone talking about an upside-down kingdom, what are they referring to?
Essentially, what comes to mind to me is the fact that the king is a servant. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve.
Okay, this is something that the Christians talk about, right?
Yeah, this is something that in the Christian community you hear this idea of the king who lowered himself to the servant's place.
Yeah.
So that's upside down.
And does it end there? The idea of an upside-down kingdom?
And I think about with the upside down, I think about the Beatitudes, the series of sayings that Jesus gave on the Sermon on the Mount that are all, look to me, to be upside down. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who are persecuted. You know, I mean, like, what? How can you be blessed for these horrible things? But it's an upside down because then they see their need for God and he can meet that need.
Yeah.
And he does meet it.
Right, and when you think about it, then in all of Jesus' teaching, it's like he changes our view of almost everything. I mean, he changes our perspective on wealth. He changes our perspective on poverty. I mean, not that he says poverty is good, but he says that out of our sense of need, we can recognize our need of our God.
And literally in society, he changes our view on children and women and slaves. You know, he changes that to where that was society's lowest strata, and he elevates and includes and equals.
And in his day, he was trying to do the same thing with his people who had become locked into the law of Moses in a way that had actually taken them away from God instead of toward him. And so he would go to them with this upside down theology saying, you have heard it said. But I say
Right.
unto you,
Right.
here's the real meaning. Don't miss the point.
Who in his day had the most issues with him?
The religious leaders.
Yeah.
The people who were defending the book, who were defending the law of Moses and regarded themselves as the faithful ones. Who was it that discovered him?
It was the prostitutes, the lepers, the tax collectors.
The common
the
man and
common
woman.
people.
Well, let's think about this. Let's just keep it in mind and pick up this unfolding story in the second book of Kings. We've been looking at it. We're up to chapter 7 now. We found that there were desperate times in the nation of Israel, in the northern part of the kingdom. They had been attacked. They had been besieged by the neighboring kingdom of Aram, which would be present-day Syria. Things were so bad that all sources of food had been cut off. And at one point we read that it was so bad that women were even, it's the unthinkable thing. We've talked about this. Women were even eating their own dead children to survive. And we were saying, how in the world, why would something like this be in the scriptures? And Elisa, do you remember what we concluded?
I do. This is a very hard section to read these stories and scratch our head and wonder what kind of God do we love. And really, I think what we see is that in these women, we see what was said in Genesis in the days of Noah, that every inclination of our heart all the time was against God, was towards evil. And maybe in a really hard to look at way, this story tells us it shows us kind of a mirror of who we are.
Yeah.
That this is what I'm
Apart from
capable of,
God.
apart
Right.
from God.
It's upsetting and it's unsettling, but you can go back and read the law of Moses, and in the book of Deuteronomy, it describes conditions just like this, where people would be cannibalizing one another as a result of turning their back on the God who had delivered them from Egypt, from the slave yards of Egypt. So let's pick up the story and pick it up at the point where the king of Israel is so beside himself that he's determined he's going to kill the messenger. He's going to kill the messenger who is Elisha, who has contributed, he believes, to this problem. And so he sends his servant to go to Elisha, and we'll pick it up at the point where the messenger on behalf of the king says, why should we wait any longer? Why should we wait any longer for your God? And Elisa, if we could pick it up with Elisha's reply.
It's chapter 7 of 2 Kings, verse 1. Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it."
Let's just sum this up. What does he say is going to happen by this time
It's
tomorrow?
like there's going to be plenty of food.
Plenty of food.
Where there
Yeah.
hasn't been any.
Right.
Yeah, they've been eating donkeys' heads and paying a fortune to get them,
Right.
which is
Horrible.
awful.
And the messenger's response, this could never happen. Even if the Lord were to open heaven, this could not happen tomorrow. Okay, dramatic scene change. And Bill, could you pick it up with verse 3?
Sure. Now there were 4 men with leprosy sitting at the entrance of the city gates. "Why should we sit here waiting to die?" they asked each other. "We will starve if we stay here, but with the famine in the city, we will starve if we go back there. So we might as well go out and surrender to the Aramean army. If they let us live, so much the better, and if they kill us, we would have died anyway."
Elisa, pick it up there.
Verse 5, at dusk they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. And when they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was, and they ran for their lives.
Bill, just give us a little commentary. What happened there?
Well, what happened is that the same God who had blinded the eyes of the Aramean army in a previous conversation so that they couldn't see where they were, now really kind of muddles their ears a little bit, so they're hearing things that aren't really there. I think of it like an audio mirage, where they're hearing stuff that isn't really there, but
That's
they're
good.
hearing it so
Yeah.
profoundly.
It seems so real.
It
Right.
seems so real that they cut and run.
Yeah. Elisa, pick it up with verse 8.
The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver, gold, and clothes, and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent. and took some things from it and hid them also. And then they said to each other, "We're not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." And so they went, and they called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went into the Aramean camp, and not a man was there. Not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys and tents left just as they were."
Okay, now, I don't know about you, but it's almost like I'm reading this incredible movie script.
Yeah.
It is.
Can you see this on the big screen?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see these four guys, and they look awful because they're lepers. And you see them walk in and say, "Man, the lights are on, but nobody's home." You know, I mean, it's
Let's
just
enjoy. And you can imagine they never get to partake of this kind of a feast. These are people who are society's outcasts. They're lepers. And they go in and they devour because they're normal humans, and my goodness, it's a feast. But in the middle of their actions, they think better. It's like they have a check inside. Wait a minute, this isn't right. And he says, this is a day that's of good news. We're keeping it to ourselves. And they think we're going to get punished if we keep at this. And so they want to do the right thing, and they change course.
It's really interesting, isn't it? The lepers, the outcasts, have some sense of conscience.
Where
they have
nobody
a
else
sense
seems
of
to.
yeah, they have a sense of moral responsibility for the very community that's ostracized them.
Yeah. I just begin to think, I've heard about lepers before in this book we're studying. If we look backwards, we find in the laws of Israel that there were all kinds of laws about the leper and how they were to be put outside the city, and they were to be people who were not allowed in camp. But if we go forward all the way to the New Testament, what do we find?
We find lepers being rescued from their leprosy in a time when there was no known cure for the disease, because Jesus comes, and not only does he speak words of healing, in at least one case he actually touches a leper, but instead of it making Jesus unclean, it makes the leper clean.
Yeah.
And it's a real symbol and truthfulness of cleaning not only the body and the disease, but really of healing the inner condition of our human hearts.
And doing what the law could never do.
Yeah.
The law, in a sense, that was protective. It was protective in that it called the people to a high standard of living. It was protective in that it helped them to avoid, by diet and by laws of cleanliness, the kinds of things that could have brought disease into camp. But now Jesus comes along, and he's with lepers. And like you say, he's touching them. And he's making them whole. And he's doing what Moses never, ever could do. And in a sense, the last have become first. The last people in the world you'd expect to be rejoicing and celebrating at their good fortune are the people who are the first to discover that God has come. The God who alone has answers for our need has come, and he's used our need to bring us to himself. It's amazing to me that as you read the Bible from beginning to end, you find some of these themes that when they show up in the New Testament, you realize they've been there all along.
That's right.
God's been showing us all along that it's our need, not necessarily our prosperity, that brings us to the place where we discover that God alone has the solutions that our hearts are longing for.
And that is one of the biggest aspects of the seemingly upside down and backwards message of the Bible, that the prosperity that we strive for and pray for often doesn't draw us close to the God who provides that so-called blessing. It's most often in our need that we're drawn into a closer relationship with God. Yeah, a great part of the conversation in this episode of the Discover the Word podcast, this event in the miraculous life of Elisha and all the layers and supernatural ways God worked. That's been our focus throughout this edition. And we have one more 10-minute segment that will wrap up this part 6 of the 7-part study of the miraculous life of Elisha with the rest of the story that we just started. Some important observations about how several themes evident in this story show up in other places in Scripture will be the direction the next part of our discussion goes right after one more short break. Now, I mentioned something about the Our Daily Bread devotional booklet earlier in the podcast, and I just want to circle back to something real quickly. I mentioned that a lot of people are what we call ambassadors, people who receive a quantity of Our Daily Bread so that they can help distribute them to others. So many have a story about how someone shared one of the Our Daily Bread booklets with them, and God used that to make a huge difference in their life. Let me read one other story, okay? This person wrote, "My grandfather faithfully sent me every single Our Daily Bread, no matter what. When I was homeless and a drug addict, he sent these to me until I came to the Lord, and then he still sent them." You can sign up to receive multiple copies of Our Daily Bread and discover how God might lead you to share this devotional booklet with others. We'll have a link in our show notes, or you can go to odbm.org, ODBM for Our Daily Bread Ministries, odbm.org, and click Print under the daily subscription options that you'll see in the top right corner of the page. And then click Order Multiple when you get under the quarterly option that you'll see. Okay, so let's wrap up this look at 2 Kings chapters 6 and 7 and get the rest of this amazing incident in the miraculous life of Elisha, and then again see how this fits with the bigger story that the Bible is telling. And so Mart wants us to begin by thinking about how we feel about authority, the use of authority, how we respond to authority, and which authority we choose to listen to.
Let's talk for a minute about the use of authority, or at least what we perceive as the use of authority. Parental authority. It seems to me that that poses some real issues for any mom or dad who's trying to figure out, how do I raise my child with enough authority but not too much? Mm-hmm. And even if we move it out of the home into business or into the military or into government, you've got a situation where if the person under authority questions the judgment of the one over them, they've got some huge issues to face. Mm-hmm. Am I willing to lose my position, my job? Am I willing to bear the anger and the disapproval of the one to whom I report?
And we've seen examples of this constantly in society.
Right.
When you see a crime committed by people in authority, do you report it or not? Or could you lose your job?
Right.
Whistleblowers and all that.
Whistleblowers.
Right. And the inclination of the person under authority is what?
To kind of fly under the radar, to just keep their mouth shut, keep their head down.
Or submit and actually agree with a person in authority even if they're wrong.
No.
It's tempting to do that.
And sometimes it's done consciously, and other times it's done unconsciously, because there's such a strong desire and will to live and to survive.
And to please.
And to please.
And to gain.
Right.
Because this is the system I live under.
Well, the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think it comes into play in this amazing story we've been looking at. It has to do with the people of Israel, who are under siege by the military of the neighbor, which would be Syria, Aram in its own day, but present-day Syria. The king of Israel has been unfaithful to the God who delivered a long time prior the nation of Israel from the slave yards of Egypt. And God now is bringing consequences to bear on that king and on his people, and things have become desperate. The city's under siege, and with what consequence?
And there's no food anywhere, and people are desperate for food, doing desperate things.
Yeah.
Right.
Even resorting to cannibalism and things of that nature, which are just so unthinkable, and yet that's what desperation means.
Right. And the desperate king, well, he's got his own response. Who's he blaming for his problems?
Everybody but him.
He's blaming Elisha specifically.
Yes.
And Elisha's the servant of God.
He's the prophet, Yeah.
So he's really blaming God.
Yeah, and wondering, why should I wait any longer for this God? And so he sends his messenger to Elisha, having threatened himself, before this day's over, I'm going to take the head of Elisha. And Elisha then, at that point, sensing the despair of the king and the despair of the people, and the fact that this messenger himself is at his wit's end, they don't know where to turn, he makes an amazing prediction. What's the prediction that Elisha makes?
Well, he makes the prediction that by this time tomorrow, food is going to be so plentiful that it's going to cost almost nothing, whereas up until that point, food had been so scarce that it was costing a fortune for almost no food at all.
Yeah, and the messenger says,
No way.
No way.
No way.
Even if God were to open the windows of heaven, there's no way in the world the city's going to be full of grain.
So the
or
king
food
doesn't
tomorrow.
believe, and now his messenger doesn't believe either.
Right. So what happens that night?
Well, a bunch of lepers who have been sitting out at the city gate as beggars and who are also starving
They must be.
decide we're just going to go surrender to the Aramean army, and if they kill us, that's okay. We're going to die anyway. And when they get to the camp, God has miraculously driven the army away, but they've left all their food and clothing and possessions behind.
Yeah, now the lepers don't know, but what do we know from actually the biblical account? What actually happened that
God
night?
actually created the sound of chariots and armies and scared them so badly that they fled.
Right, the Arameans thought, Israel's done it. They've hired the Egyptian army to come and to overcome us, to conquer us. So you're right, they fled. They left their clothes flying in the breeze and their food behind and their money behind and their horses behind.
So
their
everything
donkeys.
was there
Right.
when the lepers got to the camp.
And the lepers' response, Bill, was what? What did they do?
Let's have a party. I mean, they were in high cotton at that point. That's what they say down south.
Yeah, I guess so.
They just had it all. They had food and drink and clothing, and they actually started hiding some of it, burying it in
they're
the ground.
burying it. And lepers were like, what had their experience been prior to that time?
Oh, mercy, they didn't have any access to this kind of riches or even nice food. So they were truly
Right.
enjoying.
But as they're drinking the wine and they're eating the food and they're burying the gold, something happens.
They had a conscience attack. They realized, hey, this is a good day, a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves.
So what did they do?
They felt badly about it, so they returned and they reported to the gatekeepers outside the gate.
Yeah, they couldn't go into the city of Samaria,
No.
so to the gatekeepers the outside.
And isn't it cool that God, who has been giving supernatural information to his fully functioning prophet Elisha, chooses to bring this news through 4 outcasts?
Yeah. Okay, we're ready for the rest of the story, okay? Lisa, if you'd pick up with verse 11 of 2 Kings chapter 7, and let's get the rest of the story now.
The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. Well, the king got up in the night and said to his officers, I'll tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we're starving, so they've left the camp to hide in the countryside thinking, they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city.
Bill, why don't you pick it up at
Sure.
that point?
Verse 13, one of his officers replied, we'd better send out scouts to check into this. Let them take 5 of the remaining horses. If something happens to them, it'll be no worse than if they stay here and die with the rest of us.
Now, the king had said what is going to happen. You're going to get ambushed.
You're going to go out there. And he said, okay, well, let's go test it and see.
Yeah, what have we got to lose, right?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've got these few scrawny horses left. I mean, if they die out there, they
Yeah.
might as well die in here. It's not going to help
Okay.
anything. So 2 chariots with horses were prepared, and the king sent scouts to see what had happened to the Aramean army. They went all the way to the Jordan River, following a trail of clothing and equipment that the Arameans had thrown away in their mad rush to escape.
Can you just see that?
It's a great picture.
I mean, absolutely desperate now.
Yeah.
Tables have turned.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Okay, at least pick it up at that point.
Verse 16.
Yeah.
Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans.
Who
So
did now? These
the
are the
people.
people of Samaria, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, which is Israel, right?
Yeah.
So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said.
What did that sound like?
Prophecy coming true.
Yeah.
Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he had leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened, as the man of God had said to the king, about this time tomorrow a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? And the man of God had replied, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. And that's exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died.
And there's a lot of drama here, isn't there? And some very tragic things. It seems to me that one of the tragic things is that the king's messenger is the one who ends up getting trampled
Not
at
the
the
king.
gate,
Not the king.
and not the king.
But you get the impression that the messenger has been echoing the words that he has heard from the king's mouth.
Exactly.
The same despair, the same lack of confidence in God, the same ultimately lack of relationship
Right.
with God. And this is where it's taken him.
Don't you wonder is there significance in that? Are we supposed to hear something
Well,
in
you
those
started
words?
off with the questions about authority, Mart, and I know God's very clear about the authority of, say, teachers of the word, like in James, that, you're really going to be judged carefully, be careful with your tongue. But we also know that those who are under authority, we have our own conscience and we have our own responsibility and our own relationship with God.
Right. Bring this all the way to the New Testament. You find a group of teachers in Israel who had been teaching the law, and the people were trying to respect them. People were trying to buy in. But we know that then, in the New Testament, under the gospel times, as in this Old Testament circumstance, you've got leaders who are not necessarily themselves handling what has been entrusted to them, and the people are the ones often who pay for it.
Yeah.
I think it's a reminder to us that, yes, our kings, our parents, our military leaders, our presidents, our governors, they're accountable to God. But we also are accountable not just to those leaders, but to God. And when we have an opportunity, when we find ourselves in a position of being under the authority of others, I think the scriptures tell us from beginning to end, let's make sure that with one ear we listen to those who are having influence over us. With the other ear, we're listening to whatever we have heard and know about the God whose amazing story is revealed in the nation of Israel, and then ultimately in the person of his own Son.
You're listening to Discover the Word with your friends Marty Hahn, Elisa Morgan, and Bill Crowder. Good way to wrap up another part of our study of the miraculous life of Elisha, talking about the dual citizenship challenges that we face as followers of Christ. And so that was part 6. We have one more part left and a few more miraculous aspects of this amazing life of this prophet that we want to cover. So this famous prophet, spokesperson for God, was he successful? I mean, did Israel listen to him? Did they follow God better because of what he said and what he did? Maybe not the results you expected. And then in a strange twist that sounds more like an urban legend, did Elisha's miraculous life continue even after he died? And can you think of any other after-death miracles in the Bible? Well, you don't want to miss the conclusion, part 7 of the miraculous life of Elisha. Discover the Word is provided by Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global Bible engagement ministry that has more than 30 offices around the world, distributing content in 58 languages in more than 150 different countries. And as a donor-funded nonprofit ministry, it is the generous support of listeners like you that makes it possible for us to share the life-changing story and wisdom of the Bible with people literally around the world. You can give when you go to discovertheword.org and click the Donate button that's up at the top of the page. Thanks. And thanks for listening. I'm Brian Heading. Discover the Word is Bible engagement for life.